Good evening. I'm Suzanne Watts Henderson, Dean of Bell Chapel here at Queens. On behalf of our chaplain, Joey Haynes, and our amazing students who serve on the Interfaith Leadership Council, it's my honor to welcome you to the third annual Presbyterian and Pluralist Week. If you're like I am and you're in Charlotte tonight, you may even be grateful for the fact that we're gathering on a screen and not dodging puddles and downpours as we dash from parking to Belt Chapel on campus. As a Presbyterian affiliated school, Queens is proud to affirm important elements of the Reformed tradition, the branch of Christianity to which we belong. Early on, the leaders of the Reformed tradition embraced the notion of seeking truth wherever it may be found, and thus promoted broadly accessible education as a vital part of civil society. That's why you'll find so many schools started by Presbyterians around the world. Today, the Presbyterian Church USA is a denomination that recognizes the image of God in all people and is committed to building fruitful relationships across religious difference. At Belt Chapel, we recognize that our community, our students, faculty, and staff, is made up of people who identify with a wide variety of religious views, sometimes none at all. Our pluralist impulse goes beyond tolerance to create opportunities such as this week's events to learn about and from one another, finding common ground without collapsing important differences. Tonight's speaker, Reverend Sharon Washington Risher, speaks out of her own distinctive Christian identity, out of her own distinctive life story. But whatever your religious identity or lack thereof, we hope that our time together will inspire you to consider anew abiding human questions around pain and forgiveness and hope. Whatever your religious identity or lack thereof, we are glad that you're here. And now, without further ado, it is my privilege to turn it over to Erica Marshall, who will introduce Reverend Risher. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Erica Marshall, and I'm a graduate intern in the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement here at Queens. We would like to take a moment to acknowledge our partners for this event, the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement, the Psychology Department, the Interfaith Leadership Council, and Belt Chapel. We would also like to thank Media Services for their support with planning this virtual event. Now we have come to the moment we're all here for. I'm honored to present to some and introduce to others Reverend Sharon Washington Risher. Reverend Sharon Washington Risher was born in Charleston, South Carolina, where she attended the public schools and graduated from Charles A. Brown High School. She graduated from Johnson C. Smith University in Charlotte, North Carolina, with a BA in political science. Sharon heard the call to professional ministry in 2002 and left North Carolina to attend Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary in Austin, Texas in the spring of 2003, and graduated from Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary in 2007 with a Master of Divinity degree. Sharon was a staff chaplain and trauma specialist at Parkland Hospital of Dallas, Texas, where she was employed until March 2016. She served on several committees at the hospital. Sharon served at Rice Chapel AME Church in Dallas, Texas as Associate Minister for Congregational Care. She preached and led the women's ministries of the church until April 2015. On June 17, 2015, a horrific tragedy happened. Sharon learned her dear mother, Mrs. Ethel Lee Lance, was killed in Charleston, South Carolina at the Mother Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, along with 8 other people, which also included 2 cousins and a childhood friend. Since that time, Sharon has been very outspoken about the nation's gun laws and is one of the spokespersons for the grassroots advocacy groups, Every Town for Gun Safety and Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. She has appeared on CNN, Good Morning America, Roland Martin's News One, CBS, and other national news outlets. Sharon has been interviewed and written articles for Time Magazine, Vogue, Marie Claire, Essence, Texas Monthly Magazine, Guardian, BCC Radio, and NPR, amongst others. She has visited President Barack Obama at the White House on several occasions, spoken at the Washington National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., and she has been a guest speaker for several Martin Luther King Jr. memorial events. Sharon has traveled across the country speaking at colleges, universities, and churches about her personal journey. She's testified before several judicial committees and most recently testified at the confirmation hearing for former Attorney General William Barr before the Senate Judiciary Committee in favor of a new law called the Charleston Loophole. Most importantly, Sharon is a sought-after speaker traveling across the U.S., sharing her story of loss, forgiveness, racism, and gun law reforms. Sharon has two adult children, Howard Brandon and Asia Charnay, who both reside in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now introducing Reverend Sharon Washington Risher.
Hello and good afternoon. I'm delighted to be with you tonight and to have this opportunity to be your keynote speaker. And I want to express my personal appreciation to your chaplain, Joey Henney, and all the other organizations that was instrumental in having this program tonight. I've spent most of my adult life in Charlotte. So it kind of feels like the prodigal daughter coming home. I'm grateful and I'm humbled to be with you. For everything that I've experienced in my life, I'm a proud daughter of the American South, a true geeky girl from the low country of Charleston, South Carolina, and a product of the civil rights era. My Southern Black heritage has shaped me into the woman of faith that I am today. But like many African Americans from the South, I am no stranger to hate and intolerance that has unfortunately defined a large part of African Americans' history. Losing my mother and my cousins in the most horrific manner while praying in a church because of hate has changed me and my family and all the other families impacted by that horrible tragedy. So most of you know the basics of what happened on that hot June summer's night. But that night, this young white supremacist walked into that church to shoot and kill as many people as he could. You see, this was just not a spontaneous action. He had did months of research and preparation, several road trips from Columbia, South Carolina to Charleston, scouting out the church, finding out where the exits and the entrance were to that historic church. You see, that day, that night, the church was full of hundreds of people. The AME Church was having their quarterly conference. And in the AME denomination, quarterly conferences are held for the district to know how the church would proceed in that quarter. A very informational meeting. The meeting ran overtime, and there was a discussion about whether they would actually have the Bible study. My childhood friend, Myra, had just gotten her license to preach in the AME church. The first time that she would lead the Bible study. And so the people that stayed that night knew this and wanted that night to be special for Myra since she was so well prepared. So they went along with having the Bible study. They invited this young man in. As he approached the door, he asked to be seated next to Reverend Pinckney, and that's what they did. They sat, they listened to the Gospel of Mark, chapter 4, the parable of the sower. And when it was time for dismissal, they all stood together with their heads bowed and their eyes closed. And that's when he pulled out his .45 Glock and commenced to killing them. They scattered all over the fellowship hall, running and hiding under tables, where he walked and shot them where they were. This young man not only robbed my family, but 8 other families and their loved ones. 5 people survived. 5 people have to live the rest of their lives with the images of what happened in that fellowship hall that night. They died because they were Black. I continue to say their names because my mission in life is helping other people know that no matter what, hate won't ever win. That we as humanity is bigger and stronger than any one person or group. I call their names because I want you to remember that they are just not names, that they were people that had families and lives. Their names are my beloved mother, Mrs. Ethel Lance, my 2 cousins, Mrs. Susie Jackson, who was 87 years old and lived around the corner from the church and walked to church that night. My 26-year-old cousin, Tywanza Sanders. My childhood friend, Myra Thompson. The pastor of the church, Reverend Clemente Pinckney. Reverend Daniel Simmons. Reverend Sharonda Coleman Singleton. Reverend DePayne Middleton Doctor. And Cynthia Hurd. I pray that whenever you hear or see their names, that you feel empowered to help invoke change. Let me tell you a little bit about Mama. She was a great woman of faith who worked all her life with my stepfather, Nathaniel Lance, to provide for our family. There were 5 children, 4 girls and 1 boy. My mother encouraged all of us to get an education because she understood, as being a Black person without being educated, your chances of success will be cut in short if you did not have an education. You see, my mother had to drop out of school. And in my book, you'll know why that happened. She was raped by 3 white men. And because of that horrific event, I'm the product of that. So that's why she had to drop out of school. My grandmother told her, because of her pregnancy, that she would need to work to be able to take care of me. My mother ended up going back to night school at the same high school that I attended during the day. We both graduated high school in 1976. That was one of the proudest moments of my mother and my life, that we had accomplished getting our high school diploma. And for me, the thought of being able to continue on to college was something that my mother could not have dreamed of. but I did because of what she put in me. My parents didn't have a whole lot of money to send me to school, but with grants and student loans, even my sister Terry, who was a year behind me, we both ended up going and attending college. Johnson C. Smith University here in Charlotte, a Presbyterian related school. Who knew back then that my relationship with the Presbyterians would end up being so deep? Mama had a big heart, and she was definitely a Salvation Army goodwill kind of girl. All the people in those stores in the area she lived knew her, and they would hold things for her because they knew what she liked. Mama loved really nice perfumes. She loved dancing to James Brown, and we can all be together when we danced with her in the middle, when we would celebrate holidays or Thanksgivings or whatever was going on, when I was able to travel to be in Charleston with my family. Mama had a strict work ethic, decent and in order. That was Ethel. That was her. Mama was just a no-nonsense kind of girl. December 5th, 2016 was the day that we were to start the federal trial. We had already been through several delays, so all of us, we were anxious. The families, we were anxious because we really didn't know what would happen in that courtroom. We spent almost 10 days of sitting in a courtroom, listening and seeing every piece of evidence they had against Dylann Roof. How do you get those images out of your mind of their broken bodies as pictures of the crime scenes and witnessing the video of his taped confession, reading his jailhouse rants, and on and on? We heard and seen things in that court that we won't ever forget. It's left an imprint on my brain and soul that will remain forever. I sat there day after day, feet away from him in that courtroom, trying to understand why. When I was given the opportunity to address him, I said to him, I pray that those 9 angels will visit you every night in your cell to have Bible study with you. And before your life is over, I pray that you would call on the name of Jesus and ask for mercy. We finally received the word back that the jury had come back with a guilty verdict. Guilty on all 33 accounts, including hate crimes. I had to tell myself to breathe. One half of my brain was having a party while the other half was feeling such deep, deep sadness. Sad because I had witnessed the judicial system more than once be unfair to people of color. This was not a victory only for us in Charleston. This was a victory for the whole country. January 10th, 2016 was the day for his sentence. The death penalty or life in prison without parole. It was agonizing. I felt sick the whole time. I had been very vocal about my feelings regarding the death penalty. Because you see, once I had time to think about what that death penalty really meant, I knew that I did not want that to happen. But yet in my angry heart, I wanted him dead. But my own faith, my deep faith and convictions took over my heart and my mind, and I would hold firm. You see, we sat in that courtroom with hushed tones waiting. My sister Esther wanted him dead. No discussion about that. But we sat together holding hands with differing opinions, but all we knew is that something had to be done. I wanted him to be gone from this earth, to vanish in thin air. And then that inner core, that the Holy Spirit would bring me back to being the spiritual person that I am. You see, because I couldn't stay in that human space. I couldn't stay in my humanness because my faith in my heart knew that regardless of who did the killing, that killing someone was wrong. I have talked with so many people who passionately wanted him to get the death penalty. My experience have shown me that too many African Americans and people of color have been executed and put to death by the courts because of systematic racism. So I began to accept this movement of emotions and feelings I was trying to process. I had to be willing to move like a ribbon of steel, to be able to move fluidly, willing to recognize my humanness and stay in the spiritual. Or I would go down a dark hole, fully doubting my beliefs and weakening my faith. He was given the death penalty. I was so glad that it wasn't left up to me to make that decision, because who knew or where I would be in that instant. But I thank God for God's grace and mercy. And I said to myself, Lord, I accept your will. I was numb. We all just kind of sat there for it seemed like eternity, and then we all just started to hug and cry because that part was over with. I knew that they were gone. I'd seen my mother in the casket, but that day in that courtroom made me realize that they were really gone, that this was not a dream. This was real. My journey moving towards total forgiveness had been hard and lonely and complicated. Because you see, right at the beginning, national attention was given to how great it was that the families had given this killer automatic forgiveness. The act of forgiveness was front and center. All of the news media, news outlets, print media was just talking about how phenomenal it was that these people in Charleston, 48 hours after the murders, that they were willing to give him automatic forgiveness. My sister Nadine was the first person to speak at the hearing. This is what she said. I forgive you. You took something very precious away from me. I will never get to talk to her ever again. I will never be able to hold her, but I forgive you. And may God have mercy on your soul. You hurt me. You hurt a lot of people. If God forgives you, I forgive you. I was still in Dallas, Texas, where I was living at that time. I was in my bedroom and had the TV on. And when I heard my sister's voice, I ran into the living room to watch her and other family members, one after the other, saying that they forgave him. That Charlestonians displayed such grace and dignity after the murderers. Charleston was pegged that place of such amazing grace, where former President Barack Obama at Reverend Pinckney's funeral stood on that stage and started to sing Amazing Grace. But you see, for me, it was not Amazing Grace. I was not ready to deal with such a heavy spiritual act. Here I was, an ordained minister, talking about there was no forgiveness from me. I was not going to jump on the forgiveness bandwagon. How could I, when my brains were still reeling from the fact that that tragedy had happened in that church? That my mother, someone who always stayed in the background, who always felt like she couldn't speak well enough, so she stayed in the background, and here she was involved in this horrific thing. No, I didn't want to forgive him. I yelled and screamed and cussed at God. Because you see, I know that God is bigger than anything that I could ever think about. So I knew my little old self was not saying things to God that he didn't comprehend. I felt like God knew my heart, but that he would guide me. God would guide me to where I needed to be. But God would let me be authentic in those feelings. The media tried to make it seem like my sister and myself, that we were estranged from each other because of the differences in forgiving. But you see, my family was caught up in the strain of my mother's death, and there was not a whole lot of conversations going on between me and my baby sister. My other sister, Esther, she just couldn't deal with it, but she said that she would never, ever forgive him, just like she wanted him to get the death penalty. I didn't attend church for a good while. I know more than 6 or 7 months. But that one particular Sunday, God moved me and said, Sharon, go to church. So I didn't go to a church where I knew people would know me. I went to a Baptist church here in Charlotte. I sat in the back. The music was good. The preacher was preaching. And then he started to talk about forgiveness. And my ears perked up. He said that forgiveness should be instant, that God forgives us instantly, and that we should forgive instantly also. Don't you know, I thought that I would shoot through the roof of that church. I couldn't understand how this man was saying this, not knowing that there are people that have faced horrific things, and having to go through the process of understanding forgiveness was something that a person has to do. And I felt like God would not hold that against you. I couldn't believe what he was saying. I wanted to ask him, Well, what about the people like me that are struggling to get there? Because you see, I hadn't found the scripture yet to tell me how long it takes for forgiveness. What about helping us to get there? Showing us what spiritual acts that we would need to help us get along with this. I guess in the deep recess of my heart, the anger that I felt in that intense grief, maybe somehow I didn't want to release it. But yet I never stopped praying. I never stopped yelling at God. And then on October 1st, 2017, a seminary friend of mine invited me to Martinsville, Virginia, to preach for a World Communion Sunday. I was preaching, and the next thing I know, the words, "I forgive you," came out of my mouth. My brains are scrambling because I'm a manuscript preacher, and I'm saying, and I'm trying to get myself together to keep on. But I couldn't. With tears rolling down my face, I said it again, "I forgive you." I heard myself say from the depths of my soul those words of realization. You see, it didn't come without a warm sensation, without God hugging me, but telling me that I was strong, that I was faithful, that I have dealt with this, and God had seen me through. You see, God allows us all the time we need to come to a place of peace after so much hurt, pain, and grief. I urge anyone who has to deal with forgiving someone, or even if you need to offer forgiveness, to take your time. And if you're a person of faith, or even if you're not a person of faith, being authentic and real and working through whatever it is you're working through, I promise you, there will come a time of peace, and you won't ever have to visit those hurtful feelings again. It's been almost 6 years since that night, and lives have changed, and family members like me have found ourselves trying to figure out, where do we go from here? How do we pick up the pieces of our lives that have been shattered into pieces? You know, I don't know if I had buried my head in the sand before the death of the 9 in Charleston, but I didn't realize so many people believed and followed a white supremacist, white nationalist ideology. Because of those blatant acts of hate, I stand here today as an accidental activist. An accidental activist is someone who finds themselves in a life-altering experience and spring into action for whatever cause or issue. Not every activist starts out with the goal of changing the world, but by bringing some change where they are. Some of us have had our lives shaped by chance or quirks of timing and strange coincidences. Our unwillingness and simple inability to ignore the social injustices in the world propels us into action. I became involved in the gun violence prevention movement soon after being back in Dallas after all the funerals. The church had sent a packet of envelopes and cards, and I sat down and said, okay, let me look through these. And a particular envelope caught my eye. And that envelope had a heart-wrenching letter from Lucy McBath. Lucy McBath's son, Jordan Davis, was killed in 2012 in Jacksonville, Florida. It was the Stand Your Ground case. I don't know if you remember or even heard when a white 47-year-old Michael Dunn did not like the loud rap music coming out an SUV that was at the gas station where he was. He asked them to turn down the music, and these teenagers, they were on their Thanksgiving break. And they said some words to him that he didn't like. He went back to his car. He got his gun. He shot into the car. Jordan was hit and killed instantly. Out of that tragedy, Lucy became a spokesperson for Moms Demand Action in Every Town for gun safety. Because of all the work that she had done, Lucy is now Congresswoman Lucy McBath from the 6th District of Georgia, the same district that Newt Gingrich held that seat. That's the kind of work that Lucy is doing now, an activist. Because of my activism, I have cried with more people than enough. From that connection, I became involved with the most important movement. More than 3 million people, mayors and cops and moms and teachers and gun owners, everyday people have come together to make their own communities safer. Together, we are fighting for the change we know that will save lives. Gun violence touches each and every person one way or another. We have had more mass shootings than we can think about. Yesterday was 3 years since the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. 17 young people were killed, many, many more injured. I have met so many of those families, and not only from the Parkland shooting, but the Vegas shooting. Just so many people, lives have been shattered because I feel and we feel of the lax gun laws that we have. I have said time and time again, prayers and thoughts and vigils are not enough. We have to take action in a real way. We need prayers with feet, prayers with action, boots on the ground. For far too long, change has been disillusioned by the Washington gun lobbyists. Leaders who refuse to take common sense steps that will save lives through gun law reform and legislation that will bring common sense gun laws to protect all. Many people believe that the gun violence we experience in this country is not a political issue. Well, I believe it is a political issue, but more than that, I believe it's a heart condition. A heart condition because if gun violence in America does not make your heart hurt, cause pain in your soul, then I don't know what will. Did you know that there are more than 100 people every day that are killed by gun violence, and more than 12 kids are killed because of guns? We have a national problem that affects each and every one of us here tonight. The racism that comes along with gun violence is very deadly. Because you see, we find ourselves living in a time where this country is divided more than it's ever been. People are living in fear and speaking out of their pain and confusion. The coronavirus has almost destroyed the way we live, and I wonder what our new normal will look like. African Americans and people of color are wondering who will protect our rights and laws under the Constitution that we had to fight and be killed in order to have. Who will ensure that all people have the same privileges and rights as the next person? As people of faith, me being a messenger of God's words, I believe we have a duty to begin the conversation about race over and over and over. And I believe that our congregations all over this land can come together to figure out how we can actually be that beloved community Dr. King talked about. Dr. King said churches can no longer sit on the sidelines while our sisters and brothers are in need. Dr. King understood how the church had to be the one to step up. He said, if our sisters and brothers are hurting, no matter where they are in the world, we hurt also. The church universal must not stay quiet. No matter where we live, if it's behind gated communities, if it's in church, no matter where we are, our lives can be affected by gun violence. And this, not just mass shootings, every day, people are being killed. I know some people feel like the gun violence prevention movement is all about taking a person's gun away, but that's not true. It's about finding out ways that we can somehow make the usage of guns not so prevalent. Do we not understand that when you have a gun, that a gun is meant to kill? I believe, now this is just me, if you have a gun, you're telling me, if you find yourself in a situation that you are willing to kill another person, wow, what kind of heaviness would that be? In conclusion, again, Dr. King said, nothing will be done until people of goodwill put their bodies and their souls into motion. And it will be that kind of soul force brought into being as a result of this confrontation that I believe will make a difference. This journey has taken me to places I never dreamed I would be, talking to people like you who were willing to hear what I have to say. There comes a time in all our lives where we will face some of the most challenging experiences. But you see, is how we decide to accept and press forward defines who we are and what we are to become. I didn't ask for this journey. I would rather not be speaking to you. I would rather be traveling back and forth to Charleston, enjoying my mother's gumbo, dancing in the living room with her. But that's not my truth. That's not my realization today. But here we are. I hope you have heard one thing this evening that you didn't know before, something that will stir your heart to do something always for the betterment of yourself. And then to be able to bring someone along with you who may not look like you or talk like you. We share this country together. Let's figure out how to live, love, and respect each other by any means necessary. Thank you, and God bless each and every one of you. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Reverend Risher, for sharing this story, sharing your story, your vulnerability, your tears. I'm certain that you are probably not alone in sharing some of those tears. So thank you for just being in this space. And it's a lot, I think, to hear these words and,
you know what, it is a lot. It is a lot. And I've been asked, how do you continue to do this over and over and over? And I tell you, there are times when there are no tears. And then there are times like this when they are tears. I've learned to just kind of go with the flow. And God gives me strength to tell this story over and over. And every time I say it, it's never the same. The story might be the same, but there are words and understanding that are always different. So I appreciate all of you for being willing to hear me.
Yeah, I know I think everyone in this new virtual world is a little exhausted from Zoom, and we sort of wonder, like, can we even have meaningful conversations and experiences, through a computer screen? And I mean, honestly, I feel like I'm sitting in some sacred space, even through this computer. And so, I just feel, I hope others, is feeling that same spirit that's, I think, flowing through this experience. And so thank you so much. So with that, we will be moving on to just a brief time of questions and answers. And I'd like to go ahead and invite two of our juniors, Rose Saul and Allison Blackwell, to turn on their cameras. They and some other students have come up with a couple of questions to sort of get this time started. And for everyone attending tonight, if you do have questions, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So I invite you all to type in some questions, and we'll try to get through as many of them as we can. So again, thank you so much. And Allison and Rose, if you're with us.
Yes. Thank you, Reverend Risher, again, for coming to speak with us and sharing your words. A question we had, and we kind of wanted to know a bit more about, is if you can share a piece of wisdom from or a strong memory you have of your mother that has stood out to you in your day-to-day life.
Let's see. Well, one thing, I keep my house clean and spotless. Cleanliness is next to godliness. If I leave a cup or something overnight in the sink, I look and say, okay, mama, I'll get it tomorrow. Don't fuss at me. But she had a strong personality. Even though she was shy, she never felt like she was good enough. And growing up with that, I always felt like, no, I won't be like her because I'm always going to be good enough. So knowing that, I did what I could to educate myself, to learn how to mingle among any persons no matter who they are and where they come from. And if there were things that I didn't know, I would keep my mouth shut, but I would listen. So that's one of the things she taught me. When you don't know, keep your mouth shut and listen and learn. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you again for sharing your whole story. It was very, very powerful to listen to. Another question that we had, in your encounters with other victims of gun violence, what role have their religious or spiritual identities played in their healing, if any?
You know, that's a good question. Mostly their faith has guided them, because when you're in such pain and loss and grief, like me, you don't want to talk about God. You don't want to go to church. You don't want people to say things like, oh, God won't put any more on you than you can handle. You know, all the cliche things people say when they really don't mean any harm and they're trying to offer some kind of comfort, but those words hurt. So people go through that time of not wanting to deal with their fate, and then they come back to the point where they know the only way that they're going to be able to get through it individually is a faith, or through the support of their family, or through support of other victims. Because one thing we know together, we know the kind of pain and grief. So we're actually there to be a support for each other if someone wants it. And that's part of the Everytown Survivor Network, that not only do we just share our stories, but we are there for one another. Yeah.
I guess going off of that, what kind of interactions have you had with people of other faiths or worldviews that have shaped you and your journey to forgiveness?
Well, coming out of seminary, you know, you encounter all kinds of different people. Even though it was a Presbyterian seminary, you still dealt with people from other denominations. And you just begin to understand that your point of view is not the only point of view in the world. And if you're willing to listen, you find out that we all have common threads in what we believe, and that is the love of people and how we are together as people. We can make things happen. Last year, I was in Chicago and I attended a Friday night Shabbat service. Thank God, even though I failed Hebrew 3 times, I sure did, I still was able to follow along with the worship service, and it was so moving for me. I felt like, even though I might not have understood all the words, the feeling and depth and sensitivity was pouring out of those words, and it just gave me a sense of peace. Yeah.
Okay, it looks like we do have a question in the chat box. So, in your experience, does the fight for justice ever get tiring? What do you do? Or what do you say to yourself to keep moving forward in your activism?
Yes, it's very exhausting. Every other day, I tell myself I'm going to find a job. And then something will come up. And then I know that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so sometimes all you could do is cry. Sometimes you just want to sleep. And that's my way of dealing with things. I'll get into bed and go to sleep. And by the time I wake up, whatever was holding me down or feelings I had will have evaporated, but it is tiring. And I just keep telling myself, the story that I have to tell has to be told. And if it affects one person, then I'm doing what God has called me to do. So I just keep encouraging myself. You know, sometimes you just got to encourage yourself. You can't wait on other people to give you that push. You have to know that you are worthy and what you're doing is important.
We have another question in the chat box, and this person has said that I have a family that lost a sister and a daughter tragically. I'm often at a loss for words with how to help and support them. As someone who has tragically lost family yourself, what are the best ways to support someone who's going through that kind of sorrow?
You know, I think the best thing is that you can ask, what can I do for you? Then that way a person has an opportunity to tell you what they need. And if they don't tell you, then if you know them, you could just buy a bunch of flowers out of the blue and just take it to them. Or you can order a meal and just let it come. Most of the time we tell people we don't need anything, and that's a lie. But we lie because we don't want to seem so needy when we are. So a person has to use their imagination and just do something that you might not even get a response, but you know you did something. And that's the point. Do something. Just don't wait for someone to tell you what they need. Ask them what they need. And if they don't tell you, then figure it out and just do something anyway.
Thank you. We have another question. Someone asked, after such a horrific tragedy and in such a broken world, how does one continue to have a healthy relationship with God?
Wow. Ooh, that's heavy. Because, you know, for me, I believe that there are times in our lives when our relationship with God kind of float in and out. And sometimes we're just so prayerful and we read our Bible and we attend church and we do all of these things. But if your heart isn't in it, no matter what you do, you're not going to feel that closeness and have that relationship. So allow yourself to just go through whatever you go through and just know that no matter what, God will not leave us. So we don't have to be, you know, high on the mountaintop all the time. There are lows in the valley, but God is in the valley too. Yeah.
So I am looking at the time, and I know it's rainy outside, and most of us are, I'm sure we've been on the computer all day. But I would like to maybe end sort of our final question, one focused a little bit on some joy, which someone asked in the chat box. Can you give a story of Black joy you have witnessed in quarantine? I feel like we all need that kind of serotonin.
Okay. Black joy. My daughter announced a couple of months ago on a Zoom call with family members that she was expecting a baby. After my family has had so much death, after my mother, I've had a sister and a brother that have succumbed to their medical conditions. And I just believe they never got over losing mama. They were not as strong as I am, or maybe my sister Nadine. But that was some Black joy to know that I only have one daughter. I have a daughter and a son. And to know that I will get to be a grandmother. knowing how much my mother loved being a grandmother. Even though she won't be physically here to participate in that joy, she will be around us. And that's brought me joy. And with Zoom, they've had all these kind of different concerts and things. So I've been having some joy in the midst of all of this pandemic. It hasn't been all just sad news and depression. There has been some joy. Yeah.
And one more quick thing, speaking of joy, tell us about the quilt that you have displayed behind you.
So this quilt came from a United Methodist Church in Pennsylvania. After the tragedy, cards and gifts and all kinds of things started pouring in to Emmanuel Church. So then they started to gather these things and separate these things and give the family members things that had came to the church. And this quilt came. So I don't know if you can see, but at the bottom there is a likeness of the church, and there is a tree with the 9 birds on it. There's a dove. There's the the AME church's symbol. There's a butterfly for transformation. There's music notes to the bottom. And I just felt like that's a good backdrop when I give my talks. It brings some color and some visuals into the lives that were lost that day. Yeah.
Well, thank you again so much. It was just such an honor to have you keynote our Presbyterian and Pluralist Week and sort of kick off this event. And hopefully, we hope that these programs do inspire action, right?
Yes.
It's important that we, we're together in prayers, but also together in moving with our feet. And so we hope that not just this conversation, but the ones that we'll be having throughout the week will lead us to that, both as a Queens community and Charlotte community. And I think Lord knows our whole country needs it. So thank you again for being with us this evening. And I would like to just say that Dr. Suzanne Watts Henderson and I will be carrying on this conversation next week on Tuesday, February 23rd. So if you would like to participate in extending this conversation on forgiveness and hope, we will be drawing some elements from Reverend Risher's book, actually. And so that is available, and the title of that is For Such a Time as This.
There you go. Here it is.
Yes.
Available at all the places that you would buy books or order books online. Yes. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I thank you so much. And like I said, we have to continue to have the conversations over and over and over and over. Because when we talk to one another, we learn things about each other that will help us go forward. So God bless you.
Amen.
All your activities for the rest of the week. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
This
you.
concludes our program.
Thank you. Bye-bye.